Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Aloha. Can you hear me? Great. You're good? You're good? Are we all good? Cool. That's still recording. Yeah. Hello, hello, hello. Cool.
Ano ai ke aloha ya kākou. Thank you for joining us today. In just a few moments, Governor Green will be presenting the Executive Biennium Budget for fiscal years 2025 to 2027, which emphasizes reducing Hawaii's high cost of living, expanding affordable housing and access to health care, and addressing homelessness, education, biosecurity, and wildfire mitigation. During this presentation, he will provide specifics of the budget, outlining key initiatives and financial allocations that are set to impact the state of Hawaii. Facilitated questions and answers will follow promptly after remarks conclude, and without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome Governor Josh Green.
Aloha. Good to see everyone. So today we're going to talk about our budget for the next 2 years. And it's a great privilege to begin to lay this out for the state. A lot of people are going to see it in the coming hours. The legislature will have a full update on where our budget is. And here is the budget in brief, which is a thorough descriptor of where our priorities lie and where we're headed. But I wanted to unpack it for everybody so they can hear some specifics today. So before I launch into kind of the overall presentation, I will tell you this, that we are in a good place as a state. We have adequate resources to meet our priorities and needs. Nothing is ever perfect, and of course we're about to embark on the process with the legislature, who we have deep respect for. And just so everyone knows, this was a collaborative budget. We actually already have been speaking to the legislative leaders, the broader membership from time to time to talk about priorities to insert them into the budget now. We wanted it to be really a true collaboration, and they were able to give us some good priorities that they wanted. But I'm going to go over what we feel the state's priorities are in total. This is our first full 2-year budget, is one way to look at it. Of course, we had a budget that we submitted 2 years ago, shortly after assuming office, but most of those details had been worked on for 6 months or more by former Governor Ige. We were only able to do some small tweaks to them, send in some governor messages, which is additional ideas in the interlude between the election and the legislative session back in 2023. So this is our budget, our first one. Also, I want people to remember that in January, there's going to be the Council on Revenues update, and they're going to tell us whether the economy's looking particularly strong or if there's a softness and so on, and that can affect things. So those are just a couple caveats. But why don't I go right into our slides here? Okay, so right off the bat, what does this budget do? Well, this budget is a reflection of our values. And that means our values to care for one another, to care for local families. We remain completely convinced that the cost of living for our local residents and housing/homelessness are the top priorities of our state. There are many priorities, but our values are to care for local people and make sure they can live their lives, that they don't struggle, that they don't suffer. So you're going to see a lot of appropriations. The specific numbers will come in the subsequent pages that deal with housing and affordability. We also feel very strongly as an administration that everyone should have health care and social services. As you know, people struggle with the cost of health care, though in Hawaii, we have amongst the lowest costs of health care of any part of the nation, but it's still expensive, and we have to have people in the hands of good doctors and nurses and providers so that they can get the care they deserve. So you'll see us talk about that. We have to enhance education. There's an increase in the budget for education. We preserve our natural resources. I'll talk about what the Climate Action Team and DLNR have been recommending. And then we have to safeguard our community against disaster and deal with the latter stages of the Maui wildfire crisis. You'll see that reflected in this budget. The budget also prioritizes some significant investments. There's a lot of infrastructure dollars here. There are homeless dollars through the Kauhale program, which has been extraordinarily successful. There's extra education, infrastructure dollars, there's some climate work to do, and there's mental health care services to provide. You also see that we preserve the rainy day fund. We are not tapping the rainy day dollars, which are now over $1.5 billion because of the interest that's been accruing. That's important on many levels because it keeps us in a place in case we have to tap it. We would be able to if there was another tragedy or crisis. And also, it helps us keep our bond rating very good, which means our overall debt cost is lower, and that means we save money as taxpayers. Finally, we maintain very strong balances in our state financial plan. Many mahalos to our finance team. It's excellent, excellent work. They have made sure that we keep the lid on, that we are sensible about our expenditures, and also that we are prepared for the legislative priorities because we believe the legislature should give us priorities because they're so close to their constituents at all times. Finally, we preserve the historic tax breaks that are in place, and you'll actually start seeing and feeling those in January. That's very important, and I'll break those down a little bit. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There we go. Here's where our operating budget lands. The state's part of the budget will be $10.4 billion proposed, and then in the subsequent year, that's fiscal year 26. Fiscal year 27, it goes to $10.5 billion for a total of $20.9 billion of state revenues over the first 2 years. And then if you look at that second column there, all means of financing, I'll remind people that means you add federal dollars, special revenues, some of the funds that we have in the government that are generating monies and go towards services. So that essentially doubles the total spend per year. But those are monies like Medicaid, for example. We bring in a bunch of money from the state. The federal government more than matches us, and we care for our people. Just one example of many. We also have capital improvement bonds, which we're going to talk about. we're going to be doing some building, and that's very important to keep up on structure for university, for housing, and so on. You'll see what our general obligation bonds are for each of the 2 years. Again, it approaches, in this case, $1.9 billion in bonding over 2 years. We got very good bond rating, which then subsequently got us good interest rates, better than we've seen in years. Again, courtesy of the finance team and all the work they're doing, plus keeping us, in a place where we have enough money on reserve so that people don't feel that we are a risky investment. Let's go to this next one. So this is something I think a lot of people are interested in. How much money do we keep in case we have extra needs at any point for, of course, salaries and all of the programs that we are totally committed to. Take, for example, Child Protective Services. We have to have enough money to hire enough social workers and teams to try to protect kids who are vulnerable. That's an example of the monies that we need when we have carryover. So our carryover balance for fiscal year 25, which goes till June 30th next year, is $1.08 billion. And we, like I said earlier, still have our rainy day fund of $1.56 billion, $60 million of interest accrued since we last spoke. We also mentioned what will be in the second and third years, essentially fiscal year 26 and 27. You can see there what the current carryover balance will be. It's quite good. It's over $1 billion for each of those 2 years. Now, with the caveat of a couple things. We will have collective bargaining, and that will essentially cost somewhere around $300 million over the 2-year period. That remains to be seen a little bit, depending on how negotiations go, but we have a very good rapport with, from my perspective, all of the unions that care for the workers that we rely on. So I think that we have already shown some success. We already negotiated, for instance, the professors' union contract and the teachers' contract. So we do have this rainy day fund balance, and we do have a carryover balance that is good, but there will be definitely priorities that will emerge from the legislature, which will tap into some of these dollars. We tend to want to carry over at least $500 million. That plus our rainy day fund of $1.5 billion base is enough at a 20% baseline to keep us in a really terrific bond status. Let's show you what the whole government kind of looks like for the 26 operating budget by department. When you look at it this way, and this slide, just so you know, sets aside what we do for budget and finance, which is where we have our payments towards retirement and the ERS, healthcare. So I'm taking out that 36% or so, just so you can see where we're spending our money. And we're spending a terrific amount of money on human services. That, again, includes the Medicaid program, education, and health. And I'll break them out for you one by one if you need. But one number that you should see there is there's $4.8 billion in human services. Another $2.7 billion in education. Department of Transportation has to be robust, of course, to keep our roads and everything safe. University of Hawaii is a $1.3 billion expenditure, although that does include tuitions, just so everyone understands. Much of that money comes from tuition. And Department of Health. And a lot of those are federal dollars, but we have to prepare. We have to prepare for potentially a pandemic. We have to be thoughtful about vaccinations from my perspective. We have to be very considerate of women's reproductive health. All of those are built into our budget in case there is a ripple effect from the federal government. We're being very mindful of that. Let me take the next slide. This is a picture of our bonds, and you can see that, for example, there's a lot more bonds for the business and economic development because that houses housing. Okay, so a lot of those appropriations those bonds are for housing and in education. You see, obviously, a lot of spend there because we are including at least 2 new schools, Lahaina Luna, and we are also including a school in central Maui that has been overdue. One of them is $100 million in central Maui, and the number is $131 million for the school replacing the law school in Lahaina. So that is a necessary expenditure, and really we're trying to care for the people that went through so much. That's one piece of what you're seeing there. There continue to be hospital expenditures, improvements in all of our HHSC hospitals and the like. Let's look at what some of our top priorities look like in the next slide. So first of all, we balance the budget. No matter what, we're balancing the budget because it's law and we believe in it. We do it including the tax relief. All these numbers that you see there include the tax relief package, and I'm going to get to that in the next slide. The tax relief is very significant. It takes us from being the second highest to the fourth lowest. Yes, second highest in the country for state taxes, where there's state tax, to the fourth lowest over the course of 7 years. That's a 70+% decrease for some people who were really struggling to pay any tax whatsoever. So it's heavily weighted there, and the tax break ramps up in the out years. But we get started now, so people should definitely see decreases in their withholdings, and you should have more money if you are an individual, especially that does a standard deduction, that doesn't do a ton of itemized deductions. You're going to see a significant amount of tax break. That's very important because that $300 or $400 per family per month can mean the difference between being able to afford rent or not, being able to stay in Hawaii or not, being able to afford school supplies, and so on. So that's very important. You're also going to see our other priorities of housing and infrastructure, which are very deeply embedded. You see a picture there with Mayor Bisson, and heart still goes out to Mayor Bisson and the Maui community as they recover for the transitional housing that we've been building, and we're building 1,044 transitional housing units. You also see a couple other pictures of grants and groundbreakings, of which there have been many lately, and so we're continuing to put a lot of effort into infrastructure and housing. You'll see that reflected here in a moment. The healthcare workforce remains a priority. Every time we have a nurse practitioner or a social worker or a physician stay in Hawaii, we save an incredible amount of money and suffering because people don't have to travel between the islands or leave for healthcare and go to California and so on. We've already done a lot of scholarships. You'll see $15 million per year reflected in loan forgiveness, for example, for the HELP program. We've already done upwards of 900 scholarships in the first 2 years of this program, and it has been so successful that we expect to, by the end of 6 to 8 years, have no shortage whatsoever of healthcare providers. The healthcare providers that are already on scholarship are caring for as many as 700,000 of our residents in the state because we insisted that they take Medicaid and Medicare, so they have to care for those who have need. And it's a very small part of the budget, but it keeps nurse after nurse and social worker after social worker in Hawaii and brings them to us. I'm hearing stories left and right. Homeless solutions remain a priority. You'll see $50 million each of the next 2 years in the budget for Kauhale. Kauhale, over the course of a 6-year period, will save over $400 million. And that's all inclusive and all expenditures because people are not getting stuck on the streets or going into the emergency department at a very high cost. So that's a successful program. Needless to say, there's a lot of monies in the budget this year for fire mitigation, the State Marshal Office, which will be $2.2 million, up from a much smaller number when people brought it to our attention that just need more resource. And then, of course, education. The next slide, which we're going to make all these slides available to everyone so you can kind of think about them and riff on them, is the historic partnership that we have with the legislature. This is the GAP 2 program, the second phase of the tax breaks. And you can see what it looks like in 25, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So a couple interesting points. Take a look at someone who's making about $75,000 a year. In 26, they will bring home an extra $1,200 just themselves. So they will not pay that much tax. They'll pay $1,268 less. A family of 4 who are married, making $150,000 together in 2028 will pay $30,472 less in tax for the year. So we did a couple things. We gave a much larger standard deduction, and also we moved the tax bracket so that people are paying a lower rate if they're making less. And you've heard all about that, but now it's all coming together because it is affordability through the tax breaks combined with new opportunities for housing and then lots of social services. Okay, let's go down to some specifics now. I think that this will be, kind of more stimulating for people. To increase affordable housing, we need to keep making meaningful investments in actual units. So in this budget, there will be $100 million for the rental housing revolving fund. That's tier 1, $150 million for tier 2. That takes people between 60 and 100% of the median income. And then we have $40 million for the dwelling unit revolving fund. Then here's some specifics. $30 million for Aloha Homes. That's the program that was championed by Stanley. $50 million for student housing programs championed by Senator Kadani and the House leadership in housing. $56 million for Mayor Wright and the Kalemomi movement. Mayor Wright's been something that downtown has needed for not just affordable housing, but really low-income housing. And the Kalemomi is the public housing component. That's where Hakeem works. That's his space. Finally, $62 million for UH West Oahu infrastructure so they can develop housing over on the west side to get on the famous and extremely fast and costly rail. So that will bring us into town. But some people stay there, and they'll work at the university, and they'll have their lives in that area. And as I shared earlier, we did groundbreaking for, I think it's a 750-unit development just a couple days ago. Super important. Everything has to line up. The Housing Emergency Proclamation lines up with these monies that the legislature gives us, which lines up with the LIHTC tax credits that come from the federal government, and that's how you do it. But we're trying to cut the red tape so that instead of waiting 15 years, maybe it just takes 3. That's usually our hope, and it's really important because otherwise people will leave Hawaii. Okay, this next slide shows healthcare workforce stability. Like I said, we've got about 4,000 people, healthcare providers short in the state, and that's across all sectors. The usual number for physicians has been 600 to 800 physicians short. We've been chopping into that, but then you have nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, and every discipline, social workers, psychologists, and so on. So in order to get there and to kind of outcompete the mainland, we developed the HELP program. We did this in the first 2 years, and it worked. We put in, I believe, $30 million, and we also had we had matching philanthropy who helped us too. We also have about $1 million in federal funds. Mark Benioff gave us $5 million to help with the Big Island and just really amp up, because that shortage there, amp up the personnel, and it works. It brings in these healthcare providers, and they care for all of us. The maximum qualifying loan can be up to $50,000 per healthcare provider per year, although usually it's much less, to just take a chunk of their debt out so that over the course of several years they pay off their loans and are committed to Hawaii forever. Hopefully they find a relationship, settle down, buy a house, and are here for good, so that we don't come up short when it comes time to help our kupuna get health care. And kids, for that matter. It's always hard to find enough of a healthcare base for them. But this does a lot of things. It reduces the cost of living for our healthcare community, which means they stay here. And that's a particularly difficult lift sometimes, because many people in healthcare will have $300,000 or $400,000 of education loans. The reason that we focus on this group, again, one more time, is because they will be asked or required to care for everyone in the state if they get one of these scholarships. Other things you'll see is $87 million in each fiscal year for operating subsidies in healthcare for like HHSC to keep the safety net alive. There has been some discussion even in the last day or two about expanded services, for example, with Queens on the Big Island. That would complement what's going on in Kona, unless they ultimately decide to partner. But we still have to keep all of these facilities going until they are either replaced or they have a new partner. And so there will be some monies for Kona and Maui and Hilo and so on to keep things going. But we have had some successes, once again, getting matching monies. For instance, Hilo received a $50 million matching grant, again from Mr. Benioff and his extraordinary spouse, to match the $50 million we put in. So that's a whole new expansion at essentially 50 cents on the dollar, which was helpful for us and for our people over in Hilo. You're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing. Next page is Kauhale and homeless solutions. So as promised, we are going to build a lot of villages. We're up to about 16 now, completed to date. We'll finish another 10, which are all in the pipeline by the end of 2025. And then we will round out to at least 30 by the end of these 4 years. These represent somewhere between about 1,500 and 1,800 units of space for people who have a modest challenge with homelessness, who just need a little help, a small roof over their head, up to a lot more service, like we're doing in Iwalei, and people are getting full wraparound services with health care around the clock. They're off the street, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but if you do walk Chinatown and you go around town, you're seeing less of the severely ill individuals or very, very challenged homeless individuals. Less, not none, of course, but less people that are struggling that much, and that means that there will be less cost to the system for Medicaid, which means we have the opportunity to reinvest. This is why, For years, I've been saying housing is healthcare. For us, it really is. Healthcare dollars are otherwise spent in gigantic numbers if we don't care for this population. So these kauhale, which we'll do a whole separate presentation on, are going. Our projection is about $50 million per year is necessary right now. We also have explored taking monies directly from the Medicaid budget because we had that special waiver from the federal government. It's called an 1115 waiver, which allows, I believe it's 8 states that were approved, we were one, to use Medicaid dollars directly for health care. The small challenge is we switch presidents from time to time, and I don't know if they're going to continue to embrace some of what these options are. But I think it's a good test. It's bipartisan. It's red and blue states both. I will tell you this. Our projected savings, though, are up to 73% per person when they come off the street or have a shelter, and $485 million over 10 years. And that's over and above the amount that we spend. So that includes the up to $50 million that we spend. We'll be breaking that out with the legislature. We're going to fully characterize all of what kauhale means this legislative session, because sometimes it's a village, sometimes it's a vertical that we have purchased, sometimes it's a special clinic with beds that are housing, but they're also healthcare. Let's talk a little bit about fire mitigation. As everyone knows, we went through a terrible crisis beginning on August 8th, 2023, and it has necessitated a rethinking of how much support we have to put into fire mitigation and climate change. You're going to see the number 2.2 million twice. These are separate programs, just so you know. It's not the same thing twice. After we assessed what we needed, we have to have a good salary for a fire marshal, and we also have to give them a full department, help them, get going. So they can advocate for federal funds, they can advocate for state funds, so that they can get there to keep us safe. Right now, we've been doing it, of course, with the commission, the fire commission, and our directors, and that's good, but we really want someone full-time, all in on this to advocate for us. So you'll see that in the budget. It moves to the State Department of Defense. We have $15 million additional for Ed Sniffin's department for transportation to do fire breaks, cutting large fire breaks all around high-risk areas, which tend to be in the west side of each of the islands. The additional $2.2 million, separate $2.2 million for 27 positions to increase the base levels at Haima. They've been working round the clock, whether it was COVID to the Maui wildfire. There's been a hurricane or two thrown in of risk, and they just keep going. So we need to support them more. That's what we're getting for long-term disaster preparedness. And then let's talk also about a big number. This is the global settlement. Now, the global settlement, this is for all parties. Otherwise, it would bust the budget completely. That's $4.037 billion to have the Maui wildfire settlement completed. This is direct resources for survivors, for rebuilding, to support all of Maui, and to get us through this. Couple things. It prevents us, and the Supreme Court's going to opine in January, and they'll make a decision. I believe and hope that it will favor the people of Lahaina and not the insurance industry. What I hope to see is when they ratify this in about 4 weeks, we'll be able to move on fully. What this global settlement did is it kept Maui from having to worry about going bankrupt. It helped to prevent HECO suddenly from dissolving, which would have been very challenging for the state in the moment. And it helped us to move forward and rebuild for the people of all of Hawaii, but specifically Lahaina. You've seen a little bit of this before. I'll remind you, this is over the course of 3 years. This is in the budget already. HECO at $1.99 billion of the settlement. They have their payments already lined up and prepared. Kamehameha Schools agreed to pay what the state is paying, $872.5 million. We've already paid $72.5 million into the One Ohana Fund. That was to provide resources for those who lost a loved one. The other $800 million are in this budget already, and those surpluses include that already, just so everyone knows. And then telecom also contributes. Now, you should know that another $1.2 billion will come to the state, it appears, through the disaster relief monies. That will go to infrastructure and rebuilding on the county side. It's a complex negotiation to make sure we didn't get stuck for many years and have this hanging over us. Let's talk about Keiki next. So our future is the most important thing for us. So you'll see $94 million each year for continued support for school programs. As you know, we're very dedicated to early education, universal preschool, and so on with Lieutenant Governor, who's been doing a great job. So that's there. We have $20.9 million in general funds to continue summer learning hubs. We're preparing kids for college when we can. AP classes and Hawaiian language immersion programs are critically important for our cultural preservation. We have some extra dollars for student-athlete transportation. We have to make sure there's enough money ongoing to get kids on buses, which has been a constant struggle. And then finally, some more positions for the pre-kindergarten classrooms, 108 permanent positions. Because as we build those classes, we have to pay for the young teachers. So that's very important to us. Finally, you're going to see a couple legislative proposals from us that are out kind of beyond what we've talked about before. We put together the climate action team led by Chris Benjamin and a great group of thinkers on climate. They will give us in the next, say, 72 hours their white paper. In general, I can tell you this. The idea is to pursue impact fees or a revenue stream to help us with the impact of climate, whether it's loss of shorelines, fire breaks that are necessary, dealing with the insurance that may or may not be affordable for our people because of fires. That comes out of the climate action team, and I'm very pleased with their recommendations. That will be included in legislation and possibly governor's asks. What do we have to do to bring monies in? Well, we'll have a couple different options, as you've heard about. One is to take that interest that I talked about from the rainy day fund, which is over $50 million a year. That's probably the least painful way to go about it. There is some surplus there. The other discussion has been raising the TAT tax, the transient accommodation tax on hotels. Had very vibrant discussions. Somewhere between 0.75% and 1.75% would really help us a great deal. But of course, it has its trade-offs, and we're mindful of what the impact would be on tourism. And the final way would be just to do simple impact fees. But let me be very clear. And I read the editorial the other day. It was an excellent editorial about still being willing to pursue these fees. These would not be fees on local people. These would be fees on the 9.5 to 10 million travelers that come to the state of Hawaii, which I think is the right thing to do. So we're lowering income tax, we're slightly raising fees where there's a lot of impact, and we cover our needs for the climate. You also see us take a look at the wellness and recovery proposals that have come out, and that will help us support vulnerable children. It is a very big task for Department of Human Services to stay ahead because there's always a shortage of foster families, as wonderful as they are, and it's difficult when there have been a lot of people deeply traumatized, in some cases, to care for their children. And that's when you see these tragedies occur. And so we need a lot more resource there to help, and that's through TIA's group. But I think they can support the Department of Human Services in good ways. A couple other highlights before we can do questions. Continued areas of development. Jamie and I together are taking on food security and child hunger. She's taking the lead, and we expect to give you a 5-year plan in the coming months. It's not as simple as one might think. Some states have done universal lunches, and we, over time, absolutely want to get there, but we have to manage what the federal government puts in. We don't want to actually cannibalize any of those dollars. And so that, combined with ag, very good work from Senator Dela Cruz and the ag chairs in the House, we need to get into contracts with our local farmers so they know they can guarantee foods for the schools. It helps ag, it helps kids. It helps our health system, by the way, too. But a 5-year plan will emerge in partnership with the federal government to make sure that no kids are hungry. We're going to continue to work on our state and federal affairs. We do hope and expect over time to open some office at the federal level in D.C. We paused on it because of the Maui crisis, and we didn't want to distract ourselves. But there's a lot of grants that can be had there, and so that's necessary, I believe, in time. We're partnering in some fun ways with sports, for example. National Football League has been very interested in us. We're going to have the Rams come and do their training camp to a degree on Maui because they're very passionate about that. We already have the Clippers here in Honolulu. I'm luring the Golden State Warriors. Needless to say, when our stadium gets finished, I'm going to try to relocate the Pittsburgh Steelers here for at least one moment a year so that we don't have to travel. So we're going to continue with that, but it does provide some extra opportunities. And as we head towards 2028, what I decided was we should take advantage of the Olympic Games, which are coming. And we would like to do friendly matches between Japan and Korea and Hawaii, which is to say the United States, and bring some of those matches here, have some of the training like we've had in the past, but actually have some competitions. Even enhance some of our relationships with like the Ironman on Big Island. All of that is actually economic development from my standpoint. We have a new president coming in, we'll have a new athletic director coming in, and over time we'll have a new stadium. So all those things have to come together. Not the easiest of lifts, but I think necessary for society. And so in summary, look, that's my team, and you can see that it's a lot of great people. And we've worked as hard as we can for these first 2 years, but we're keeping our main focus, which is affordability, cost of living, and housing, and then a lot of other projects and programs to support people who are wrestling with tougher times. But Hawaii is in very good shape at the moment, and we intend to keep it so. Aloha.
Mahalo, Governor. We'll begin with the question and answer session with media. And first question goes to star advertiser Dan Nicasso.
Governor, how are you?
Good.
What are you hearing about your proposal to take the 50 to 60 million of interest from the rainy day fund to apply to climate? It's not going to be enough to cover your goals. And is any one topic getting more consensus about the tourism impact fee? What form, how much?
Great question. So if anyone didn't hear, the question is, what kind of feedback are we getting about scraping off the interest of the rainy day fund? I think they're going to just debate it downstairs. And I spoke to, like I said, those who might struggle with an increase in the tax, the TAT, and they heard from me over the course of 2 hours exactly what our needs are. We really need about $200 million a year if you want to dive into it deeply, and that is to get enough monies to deal with shoreline erosion, beach loss, fire breaks, and so on. I think that is the easiest part to do. That would be the easiest approach, and I think we'll probably reach a kind of a three-headed monster compromise, a small amount of TAT, some money from the rainy day fund, and then finally modest impact fee increases at certain locations. None of them should be felt whatsoever by our local residents, but that is combined with putting more monies into marketing, which would come from some of these fees, because they don't want to discourage any travelers. I'm spending a lot of time going to Japan, actually, and increasing awareness about travel from there. We opened up that corridor, the pre-clearance, for example, with Japan, and we're hoping to see large incremental improvements again in Japanese tourism as the yen improves. Everything is connected, I would just say, and we have to protect our climate and our natural resources, because there's not a lot of money historically in the DLNR budget, if I can point that out, and this is a way to really inject a lot more in.
Our next question comes from Daryl Huff, Hawaii News Now.
Hi, Governor. In terms of the insurance industry and the trouble with the insurance industry, is there anything specific here about that? Do you have an amount of money you think is going to be necessary to set up that state insurance fund? And where would that money come from?
Yes, that's a great question. So we do have concerns that all across the country, but especially in markets where there's been a disaster, the insurers are threatening to pull out. I would point out just real quickly that Hawaii has been very lucrative for the insurers. Over the last 20 years for property and casualty, our people paid $38 billion in premiums, and we've received only $14 billion in payouts. So Hawaii has been a place where the insurance industry makes just, a pile of money. So they should not pull out of the market, but I'm being firm about not giving back any of the settlement to the insurers. I don't think it's appropriate. So if they end up getting angry, we will have to set up a captive insurance fund, and I think we would have to seed it not just with monies from the state, although I could see us needing to find at least $100 million to seed that fund, but also there will be other partners into a captive market, which I would expect would be the other individuals in this lawsuit. I would not be surprised at all if Kamehameha Schools would want to help have some help insuring some of their fallow lands. I think you could see any of the partners, including HECO. If it's too hard to get insurance normally without paying a fortune, the state can do it. And for those who aren't familiar with captive insurance models, big corporations, states, countries can form an insurance plan and pay out on their own terms without taking that 50 or 60% of profit. In other words, you run your captive insurance at 0.25% margin, or just enough to manage it. So you have all that extra money in case there's a crisis. Now you have to be ready to deal with the crisis, so you sometimes do have to insure against total disaster. But it gives us the benefit of doing all this work on fire mitigation. It gives us the benefit of doing all of kind of the settlements on our own terms. I hope it doesn't come fully to that, because I'm not trying to alienate the insurance industry. I'm just trying to tell them, show some aloha for our people after a wildfire.
Mahalo, Governor. Our next question, Kevin Dayton, Civil Beat.
Hi, Governor. Governor, I wanted to talk about how the tax cut fits with the budget this year. I mean, it's extraordinary, and it's about to kick in over the next 2-year cycle in a serious way. So I think, if I remember right, then it would cost the state about 1/3 of what we currently collect in income taxes. So it's big. And I understand that the budget director has distributed some budget instructions that limit what departments can do. Can you talk for a minute about what the sacrifices are, what the trade-off is in sort of absorbing that budget cut into the financial plan?
Sure. I will bring some of the guys up to talk a little bit about this. Lewis, you guys want to come tax? But the truth is, we didn't have to make any cuts in any of our departments yet. We have been riding a surplus. We have not expended all of our monies, and so we've been able to be okay. It's quite extraordinary because we're growing slightly ahead of the pace of what the tax cuts are. However, in years 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, I think you're going to hear that the tax cuts become more significant. As I've said, we have scoured the budget, and it is a challenge to find positions that have been vacant for 4 or more years. And for those positions, we are able to save a little bit of dollars. But other things that we're doing are helping us balance the budget. For example, changing the way we deal with homeless will save us money over time and is saving us money. Making sure that our bond rating is very good and keeping our bond payments down helps us quite a lot. It turns out Hawaii is, in general, a very healthy economic state, and so we just found that it was, instead of carrying such large surpluses, we could shrink those down a little bit and manage the tax break, because all that money circulates. And as you'll see, UHERO continues to feel, at least for now, that we have a good prospect for growth. You guys want to talk about?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Kevin. I think when we looked at the overall trajectory of the financial plan over the last several years, if you look at where we were in September of 23 before the tax breaks were actually implemented, we had a revenue trajectory that was upward sloping and provided for our needs going forward. And then the tax breaks came in. But then most recently, and I know Director Suginuma can come in and talk a little bit about when the Council on Revenues came in, they actually upward forecasted the state's revenue projections. So what we are looking at in the financial plan is that the cost of the tax breaks are actually covered within that growth rate that was just recently adopted by the Council on Revenues. So essentially, it's a net. We're paying for the tax breaks with the growth of the economy before the updated revenue forecast, if that makes sense.
It does. It sort of suggests that there's no sacrifice to be made. I mean, it's all good.
Well, I think, a forecast is a forecast. So we always have to take in consideration. It's one of the reasons why I think we've taken an approach with the financial plan, and even the governor has made it abundantly clear. It's like, it's very, we still need to be cognizant fiscally, just in case something happens. If obviously there's uncertainties down the road, we have a new administration that's going to be coming up in the federal government. So there are a couple of things that we just need to be cognizant of and prepare the financial plan to make sure that, one, we can cover the tax breaks so we can provide the affordability for the residents of the state of Hawaii. But at the same time, if there are going to be any uncertainties or any changes in revenue picture going forward, that the financial plan will be able to cover that.
Let me add to that, because I know it's well said. Yes. So as we bring in an extra $300 or $400 million, those dollars go to our residents to pay for their rent, rather than to pay for us creating some new program. We are adjusting some things, like we have to pay some social workers more because we haven't been able to attract them. So there are some changes, some smaller changes. We've actually already paid for some pretty large ticket items also. We paid for the hazard pay, for example. That's already been accommodated. The good news about that large expenditure was it went to people who worked through the pandemic, and they're spending that money, all of it, back in our community. And that's created a really, robust internal economy. that was, if someone got $10,000 for their time in hazard pay, they spent that because they had put off buying a van or had put off taking care of their home. So there's a lot of people working, and that economy is good. Let me bring Seth up, maybe, or Director, you want to come?
Did you want more specifics on the tax changes?
Actually, I was going to ask a follow-up question that's related. Governor, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that the year-end balances would drop significantly when you start building in your initiatives along with whatever the legislature might come up with.
Yes.
And I think I heard you say that maybe it'll be 500 million rather than $1 billion.
Yes.
And I just wanted to clarify that, and does that apply to 2 years?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks, Director. Exactly. We actually our goal is to have $500 million of carryover balance. Sometimes we have a little bit of restriction left just for a buffer above the $500 million and the $1.5 billion in rainy day fund. So $1.5 billion for rainy day, $500 million for the carryover balance. That leaves us with $2 billion against our $10 billion budget, and that's really what satisfies the economic plan. We should be able to do that no problem. I will give you a little teaser. We are expecting a windfall in January, and I'll make a special announcement about that then for the state also, which will further help with these balances and with legislative prerogatives. So you'll have that, which is a plus up on our resources, but we will also see what the Council on Revenues says about our picture, and that'll be both in January and in April. So we got good data coming in, and we created a sound budget, but I really wanted to make sure there was a lot of resource available to have choices made in the House and Senate. They obviously have to drive our policy, and they know, like I, that there are different needs all over the place.
Hello, next question, Ashley Mizuo, Hawaii Public Radio.
Hi, Governor. My question is about the settlement. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on the insurance situation there. If the Supreme Court does rule in favor of the insurance companies, it's said that the settlement will likely fall apart. Do we have any projections on what the state would be, kind of on the hook for in the event that the settlement does not go through?
If the settlement didn't go through, which I think is unlikely, knock wood, but if the settlement didn't go through, it would actually return all of that resource to the budget, and there would be a lot of litigation. The challenge there was, for my part, I partnered with the county and all of the different, parties to move us forward so that we didn't lose, say, Maui County's solvency. If a county, if ever, runs into major economic trouble, the state has to step in. And I don't know exactly what that would mean, but they would, they'd face very serious hardship. The key here is that we've also kept in a significant amount of money in the settlement to help finish this deal off, and that's important. I think that the Supreme Court will hear from all of our attorneys, and interestingly, everyone is aligned that the settlement should go forward. That includes the plaintiffs, the county, the Kamehameha school folks, the state, the individuals and the families whose attorneys are advocating for this. We are all in favor of finishing the settlement and moving forward so all that money goes to the people and rebuilding Maui. And then you have one group, which is the attorneys on the mainland that represent the insurance companies. And they want an extra $1 billion. And it is unfortunately sinister, and it's got to be stopped.
Next question, Daryl Huff, Hawaii News Now.
Governor, how much risk or potential rewards do you see coming from the new Trump administration? Where are the risks that you're most concerned about? I think Yuhiro is talking about the effect of tariffs on the economy, concern about people being deported. There's a number of potential risks. What are the ones you're most concerned about? And do you, on the other side, see anything positive that might come from a Trump presidency that we don't talk about much here?
Sure. Okay. So that's a great question. So the risks are that they will follow Elon Musk's lead and Ramaswamy's lead and cut deeply into safety net programs. And one of the few places you can make cuts are Medicaid. So We suffered, I believe, a $300 million hit per year on average under Trump. Someone shared that with me, and we can double check those numbers for you from Medicaid, cuts. What they proposed last time, and we'll see if they proposed it again, is these block grants. Now, block grants could, to answer your question, could work for us because we like flexibility, like spending it on housing to save money on health care. But if block grants are fixed or if they even decrease a state's revenues, it's a problem. That's one thing. There is some fear that women's reproductive rights will be zeroed out in all budgets, and that means we'll need to support our community health centers more and our hospitals more. I've already prepared for that and put some monies in the budget, at least a preliminary $3 million each year, I believe, to provide for like contraception support and access to women's healthcare needs, at least referrals. Hawaii has long been a state that thought first and foremost about women's health needs rather than letting them go to the wind. So I think we will have to worry about that. The other challenges that we have on immigration is, yes, we have 45,000 migrant workers. A large percentage of those individuals are from the Philippines, and many of their family members are citizens, and some of the others are coming for some part of the year. If they were threatened for deportation, it could first hurt those families because they could be separated. We'll do all that we can to keep families together at the very least. But also, we could see industries like some of the seasonal industries where a lot of migrant workers are important, in agriculture, for example, have to leave. And we've not been able to hire enough ag workers, and we're trying to have an ag boom to produce more food. It's good for our economy. It's an interesting third leg to our stool in addition to the military and tourism. That could be damaging to us. I have, just so you know, included $10 million in each of the 2 fiscal years for the Attorney General's office if they have to hire up more support or participate in lawsuits that are national that would need to protect our people. I'm not angling to fight with the incoming Trump administration. I'm just trying to make sure that people are cared for. And I wanted to have that cushion in our budget. I would say this, the military budget will likely stay very stable. We have billions and billions of dollars of building that's going on. We still have to resolve what the military's responsibility is for Red Hill. And the negotiations of the deals for Pohakuloa and the other bases will possibly be up in the air. And we had hoped for a very favorable deal with the federal government, whether it meant land swaps or resources to do like advanced energy work and ag and housing. I tend to think we will have a less collegial relationship in that way on that. But we'll see. You know, sometimes we get surprised. When President Trump was in his first term, you might find this interesting, their team would call me as the lieutenant governor to ask if it was okay to do, X, Y, or Z on vaccinations or on masks. They were testing because it was less confrontational to talk to a lieutenant governor than to a national governor. And I understand it now. Believe me, I've seen it from both sides. So I had a very solid working relationship with some of the staff at many levels. I think it's safe to say that I have a little bit of a problem with their incoming potential HHS director. So that's for maybe another conversation because I'm going to fight hard for preparations in case we ever have to deal with a bird flu problem or an outbreak of measles and so on. It's a really open question. In general, we governors band together, Republican and Democrat, and make our case. For example, the Trump guys were already asking for our National Guard troops, and to a governor that I met at our recent meetings, everyone was said, no, please no. We're going to need our National Guard for our own emergency work. So there's going to be a lot of different dynamics.
You mean for the migrant deportations? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, that's one big example. And so like I'm saying, even the red state governors said they would prefer not to use their National Guard in that way. Truth be told, what really is going on is, Everyone is trying to see what Mr. Trump will be like and what his cabinet's going to be like, but nobody wants to give up their state's rights, blue state or red state or purple state. Everybody wants to be left alone, care for their patients, their people, their overall situation, because we've built these plans for several years, and so it is a challenge when the federal administration switches over. I have to change out all of my favorites in my iPhone and figure out a whole new list of people to call. No, I'll keep them. Yes.
On that note, I'm going to go to Kevin Dayton, Civil Beat.
Thank you. Hey, Governor, just a follow-up to my earlier question. I'm sort of obsessed over this tax cut, sorry. But I'm interested in, you've got the major unions, a couple of the major unions coming in for negotiations. Is the tax cut going to affect the negotiations? In other words, will they have to accept less because the tax cut is taking effect?
They won't. I'll bring, Seth, why don't you come up? So the expectation is essentially about $100 million in year one and $200 million in year two, based on the negotiations. That's the expectation. That's a $300 million total, and so you can see where our surpluses are at the moment for fiscal year 27 and 28. You can see they're $1.05 billion, and then $1.29 billion. So those will drop by 100 in the first year and 200 in the second year once the negotiations are finalized. And that's if we end up somewhere near where we've been, which was about 3.5% increases in the first year and a little bit more in the second year. That's what we're anticipating. I want everyone to stay super rational, and we're working well together. We've already gone pretty far on those negotiations.
Yeah, my name is Seth Colby. I'm the Tax Research and Planning Officer, so I deal a lot with revenues here. I just want to say a couple things about taxes, because I think there's a broad consensus or belief that in every state, revenues perfectly match expenditures. And that is just not the case. And that's not the case with Hawaii, and it wasn't the case with every other state. So over the last couple years, states across the country have received more in revenues than they were in spending. And so different states have elected how to remit that extra funding. The state of Hawaii, with all of our budget-like institutions, have decided to engage in a tax rebate or a tax cut, right? And that is what's happening. With the tax cut is fully in the Council on Revenue's forecast, which means it is trickled down into the entire budget. So anything that is in surplus through the budgeting process that includes the tax cut. So if they, I cannot speak to bargaining or really any type of allocations, but if there's room in the budget, that is after the tax cuts. And now, this is because there's extra money. Now, what I think you're alluding to is, are the tax cuts paying for themselves magically? That is not the case. I am a tax researcher, I'm a professional. One of the big misbeliefs is tax cuts pay for themselves. That is not the case here. What is happening is the state was collecting more money than it needed for its budgeted surplus, and it's decided to give it back to the taxpayers. And this is then they can do other things with their other collective bargaining and things like that.
So, and why did we have extra money? There's a lot of reasons. One was there was a big surge in money during COVID. And I know this takes us back a couple years, but when we were able to successfully reopen and restore our economy in October of 2020, we didn't get back to 100%, of course, but we got back to, say, 75, 80% of travelers in general. We started to reopen, and we got federal dollars. So we had a very big surplus of monies, which you then saw in subsequent years, and some of it was appropriated, but I still was kind of cautious. In year one, we line item vetoed $1 billion, and year two, $500 million, to keep in our surplus picture, so that instead of overspending in those 2 years, we were ready to spread it out over time. And it may end up being a lucky thing if we end up with less federal dollars for some of the programs we really need. So I'm hoping we won't feel any significant pain at all, no matter what changes they bring. But I'm still going to fight for year-over-year resources from the feds, because I think that, we also pay our federal taxes, and we deserve our share of the money.
Our final question, Ashley Mizuo, Hawaii Public Radio.
Yeah, one of the things I remember you saying, and that's in the budget in brief, is about eliminating vacant positions or longstanding vacant positions. I'm wondering how many vacant positions we've eliminated in this budget, and how long, were some of these, what's like the average, I guess, amount that you would be looking at to cut those positions, and how much it's saved from the budget?
Sure. That's a very good question, and I'll be honest, a difficult one to answer. A lot of the positions that we would otherwise cut ended up being a reflection of the university. And that was difficult because a lot of the positions were much smaller positions, great people, but maybe very entry-level secretaries and clerks that they had never filled. And so there is not a ton of savings to be had. So it'll be more in the hundreds rather than thousands of positions, which we can gradually move away from. Really, it's going to be, in the end, a reflection of the workforce and how things changed. There's just different needs. You just don't need certain clerks when you have, information-based systems. So things like that are, just the reality. But there will be a list that we'll produce over time, especially once we get to the legislative session. We will be completely partners with the legislature to kind of surgically remove the positions that just don't need to be there. Because what happens is if there's leftover money, sometimes then the departments need to do contracts to deliver certain services, and that's where they find that money. What I've asked them instead to do is get rid of the positions and just ask us for the appropriation. So it matches the new reality of how they're running their departments. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in information technology, for example. So difficult to say it's going to be 3,000 positions. It's not. But there are no positions that had an employee in them that will be cut. That's very important. We won't cut a single individual. We'll just gradually, through attrition, let some of the longstanding vacant positions go. Do you want to venture a guess on the number of positions? Over 4 years. Yes. Let me add one more small caveat to that, too. There was a strong internal debate about how much you could do because we also had hiring freezes for several years because of uncertainty. And some people were concerned that they did want to, over time, hire those positions, but it takes a year usually to hire someone, and there was a hiring freeze. So I'm trying to be civilized about it. The good news, though, to kind of Kevin's series of questions were we ultimately were okay with our budget because we had good carryover balances. The tax breaks are only coming in gradually, and we have had good economic growth. And again, I will tease that there's a significant windfall for the state coming, and I'm not talking about the Plavix case either, which is out there and could over time be somewhere between $600 million and $1 billion minus legal fees. But there's another, and that's going to help us quite a lot as we go through fiscal year 26-27. Okay, so look, let me just thank everybody for enduring an hour of policy wonk stuff on the budget. We wanted to be extra transparent about where we're starting. This is the starting point. The legislature, who we're working very closely with as a collaborative team, including the chairs who have been here in our office working on some of the details. Everyone is, aiming to work together very closely for this third and fourth year of our term because people are still really struggling. And so they need to see some more money back, thus the tax break. They need to see some more housing in the state so that their housing costs gradually come down. And those are going to be the priorities, plus a big push on homelessness and health care. But thank you for this time. We'll be open to lots of follow-ups in the coming weeks. Have a super happy Christmas, Hanukkah, and holiday season, and thank you for spreading the word and asking great questions. Aloha.
Mahalo. This formally concludes today's news conference.